Tonight, Marcus Chen did the stupidest thing of his life. He looked at the most powerful woman in the city, the woman whose signature controlled his paycheck, whose decision could end his career with a single phone call, and told her she could move into his cramped apartment in Queens. Told her like it was nothing, like offering a penthouse view to someone who already owned the sky. 23 hours later, she showed up at his door with a suitcase. But that comes later. First, there was the moment everything changed. 11:52 p.m. Sterling Tower's 45th floor gleamed under maintenance lights, all polished Italian marble, and floor-to-ceiling windows that turned Manhattan into a glittering jewelry box. Marcus pushed his cart across the executive-level wheels, squeaking against stone that cost more per square foot than his monthly rent. 8 years of night shifts had taught him the building's rhythms. Which elevator ground on the 32nd floor? Which conference room on 15 carried the ghost scent of contraband cigars? Which offices stayed dark after 9 when the last assistant powered down her computer and went home to a life that didn't revolve around other people's empires? The 45th floor was supposed to be empty, always empty by midnight. Marcus saved it for last because the silence up here felt different, heavier. Like the air itself knew it breathed a rarefied space. Tonight the silence was wrong. Light spilled from the corner office, the one with the nameplate reading Diana Sterling, Chief Executive Officer, in letters that probably cost more than his 12-year-old Toyota. In 8 years, he'd never seen that light burning past 10. His watch confirmed what his instincts already screamed: something had broken loose from the usual order of things. The smart play was turning around, coming back in an hour, pretending he'd never noticed. But something in the quality of that light dim, almost defeated, pulled him forward. His cart rattled softly as marble reflected the city's glow like a dark mirror. The door stood open, not wide, just enough to suggest whoever sat inside had stopped caring about boundaries, about the careful architecture of power and privacy that governed spaces like this. Marcus paused at the threshold, hand tight on the mop handle. That's when he saw her. Diana Sterling sat crumpled against the floor-to-ceiling window like something shattered. Her shoes, red Louboutins that cost $4,000, he'd heard the executive assistant's whisper, lay discarded beside her. Hair that usually fell in perfect waves now tangled around her face. Mascara tracked down porcelain cheeks. And her eyes. God, those eyes stared at nothing, reflecting an $80 million view she couldn't even see. The mop handle slipped from Marcus's fingers. The clatter cracked through silence like a gunshot. Diana's head snapped up. For one terrible moment, they stared at each other across 20 feet of polished floor that might as well have been an ocean. He watched her register his uniform, the maintenance badge, the weathered face of a man who'd learned to expect nothing from people like her. He waited for dismissal, for the curt nod that would remind him of his place in the world's machinery. Instead, something in her expression crumbled further. Marcus heard his own voice rough with surprise. "I'm sorry, I didn't know anyone was still here. I can come back." He bent to retrieve the mop, already calculating how long he'd need to wait before the floor emptied again. But her voice stopped him hoarse, as if she'd been crying or screaming or both. "Do you know what the funny thing about penthouses is?" Marcus straightened slowly. In 8 years, Diana Sterling had never spoken to him directly. He wasn't sure she knew his name, despite the badge pinned to his chest. "Ma'am." She laughed, but there was no humor in it, just exhaustion that ran bone deep. "They echo. Every room, every hallway. Footsteps bouncing off designer furniture no one ever sits on." She pressed her palm against the glass, leaving a smudge Marcus knew he'd have to clean later. "I have 4,200 square feet and 12 rooms. The only sound I hear when I come home is my own breathing." Marcus should have nodded politely, should have mumbled something appropriate and backed away. Returned to his invisible existence where CEOs didn't share their loneliness with the maintenance staff. But something in her voice reminded him of himself 5 years ago, standing in an empty apartment with a 2-year-old who kept asking why mommy wouldn't wake up. The words came out before he could stop them. "My place is small, 850 square feet, 2 bedrooms, if you count the closet I converted when my daughter outgrew her crib. The pipes rattle in winter, and the neighbors play music too loud on weekends." Diana was watching him now. Really watching. Marcus felt pinned like something preserved under glass in a museum he couldn't afford to visit. He should stop talking. Should definitely stop talking. "But my daughter's laughter fills every corner. The coffee's always warm. There's a dent in the couch from where we sit together every night to read stories. He smiled the reckless smile of a man who'd already crossed a line he hadn't known existed. You could just move in, if you wanted. The words hung between them, absurd and impossible. Marcus waited for security to materialize, for lawyers to descend, for the earth to open up and swallow him whole for having the audacity to joke with a woman who could buy his entire apartment building without checking her bank balance. Diana didn't laugh. She didn't call security. She just looked at him with those exhausted eyes, and something flickered in their depths that might have been curiosity or recognition, or the desperate hope of a drowning woman who just spotted land. "What's your name?" Marcus Chen." She nodded slowly as if filing the information away in whatever system governed her billion-dollar brain. "Marcus Chen, the man who offers his home to strangers." "You're not a stranger." The words were out before he could consider how wrong they were. Of course she was a stranger. She was the most famous stranger in the building. "I mean, I know who you are. Everyone does." "Everyone knows Diana Sterling, CEO." She turned back to the window, her reflection ghostly against the city lights. "Nobody knows Diana." Marcus didn't have an answer for that. He picked up his mop, returned it to the bucket, and prepared to retreat to the safety of invisibility. "I'll let you have your privacy. I can finish the floor tomorrow." "Marcus." Her voice caught him at the door. "Thank you for the offer." He nodded, not trusting himself to speak again, and pushed his cart toward the elevator. The doors closed behind him, and he leaned against the wall, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. What had he been thinking? You could just move in. The most ridiculous thing he'd ever said. By tomorrow, it would be a story Diana Sterling told at cocktail parties, the maintenance man who'd offered her a room in his cramped apartment. He pushed the thought away and focused on getting home. Emma would be asleep by now, but he'd peek into her room anyway, watch her chest rise and fall, remind himself why he worked nights in a building that made him feel like a ghost. 8 years ago, Catherine had been dead 3 months when Marcus took the night shift. The memorial service was over. The casseroles from neighbors had stopped arriving. His savings account hemorrhaged $47,000 in medical bills that insurance claimed weren't covered, and his 2-year-old daughter kept waking up screaming for a mother who wasn't coming back. Frank Morrison, the building's senior plumber, had found him crying in the basement supply room one morning at shift change. Didn't say anything, just sat beside him on a stack of paint cans until Marcus could breathe again. When Marcus finally managed words, "I don't know how to do this," Frank's response was simple. "You do what comes next. Then the thing after that. That's all any of us can manage." Frank had helped him find Mrs. Santos, a 60-year-old widow who charged $15 an hour to watch Emma while Marcus slept fitfully through afternoons. Helped him negotiate with the billing department at Mount Sinai. Helped him understand that accepting help wasn't weakness, it was survival. But that was before Marcus learned that survival required armor. That showing vulnerability invited the world to press on bruises. Now he kept his head down, badge visible, spoke only when spoken to. Divorced maintenance guys got fired for wandering eyes or making executives uncomfortable. He'd seen it happen. Men who'd worked the building for decades gone in a day because someone felt threatened. Invisibility was safety. His current reality played out in careful calculations. $38,000 a year, $1,400 for rent on the Queen's apartment, $800 for Mrs. Santos, $200 for utilities, groceries. He stretched by buying bulk rice and pasta, the occasional chicken breast when it went on sale. Health insurance took another chunk. Emma's school supplies. The bus passed because the Toyota's transmission was dying and mechanics wanted money he didn't have. Last week, Emma's second-grade teacher sent home a permission slip for the Natural History Museum. $50 per student. Emma had been talking about the dinosaurs for days, her eyes bright with excitement. Marcus couldn't remember feeling at any age. He'd skipped lunch for 6 days straight to save the 50. His stomach cramped by day 4, but Emma's smile when he signed the form was worth the hunger. That morning, Frank had noticed him eating crackers in the break room. "You look like hell, kid. Let me spot you till Friday." Marcus had refused. Pride or stupidity, he wasn't sure which. "I'm fine, just not hungry." Frank's look said he didn't believe that for a second, but he'd let it drop. Marcus knew the old man kept cash in his locker for emergencies. Knew he'd helped three other guys through rough patches. But Marcus couldn't take it. Couldn't be the guy who needed rescuing. Even when he did. Across town in a boardroom that commanded its own weather system, Diana Sterling defended third-quarter numbers to men who'd never built anything in their lives. Richard Hastings sat 3 seats down, his $5,000 suit crisp as his criticism. I'm concerned about these emotional decisions, Diana. The Cleveland acquisition seemed driven more by sentiment than sound business practice. Diana kept her voice level professional, betraying nothing of the rage that burned beneath her ribs. The Cleveland acquisition was driven by a 30% profit margin and strategic positioning in the Midwest market. Unless you're suggesting profit is now an emotional decision, the other board members shifted in their seats. Richard smiled, the practiced expression of a man who'd learned to weaponize civility. Of course not. I'm simply noting that your judgment has seemed off lately. Perhaps the strain of managing alone, the strain of managing a company that's up 18% year over year, that strain. Richard's smile widened. He had what he wanted, her anger visible and quotable. All I'm saying is the board wants to ensure our CEO is operating at full capacity. These are difficult times. The vote went Diana's way. It always did. She'd built Sterling Dynamics from a failing subsidiary her father had written off, turned it into a commercial real estate empire, while Richard was still deciding which graduate program his family's money would buy. But every board meeting lately felt like trench warfare. Richard had 10% of the shares from their divorce settlement and 4 allies on the board. Not enough to remove her, but enough to make every decision a battle. After the meeting, her assistant Sarah approached with concern, etched in features too young to carry that much worry. Are you okay? You seem, Diana cut her off with a look that could freeze magma. I don't pay you to monitor my emotional state. I pay you to manage my calendar. Is there anything on my calendar that requires discussion? Sarah's face closed off. No, Miss Sterling, nothing urgent. Diana immediately regretted the tone, but she couldn't take it back. Couldn't show weakness. Not here. Not anywhere. Weakness was how you lost empires. How you woke up one day and realized the people around you were circling like sharks who'd smelled blood in the water. She worked until 9, then drove to the penthouse in the back of a car service that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her driver never spoke unless spoken to. She preferred it that way. Conversation required energy she didn't have. The penthouse echoed exactly as she'd told Marcus Chen. 4,200 square feet of designer furniture from catalogs that cost $300 just to receive. A kitchen designed for entertaining she'd used maybe twice. A bathtub that could fit 4 people but had only ever held her staring at imported tile and wondering when her life had become a magazine spread instead of a home. Her routine never varied. 6 a.m. personal trainer in the building's private gym, 7 a.m. at the office, 9 p.m. home, midnight sleep if she was lucky, repeat until the edges blurred. She had no friends. Colleagues were competitors. The women she'd known before building the company had fallen away when she stopped having time for lunch dates and gallery openings. Her sister hadn't spoken to her in 3 years, still bitter about their parents' will, unable to accept that Diana had earned her inheritance by saving the family business, while Jennifer spent trust fund money in Ibiza. Tonight, her dating broker had canceled their scheduled dinner, the 3rd time this month. Apologetic text citing an unexpected conflict with another client. Diana suspected the real reason she was work. A project that wasn't yielding results. High maintenance and low reward. The kind of client who got shuffled to the bottom of the priority list until contracts expired naturally. She'd pulled up the news article on her phone while signing off on contracts her assistant had left for review. Sterling CEO, most powerful woman in city, most alone. The headline writer wasn't wrong, just cruel about it. That's when she'd gone to the office instead of staying in the echoing penthouse. Told herself she'd catch up on paperwork. Really, she just needed to be somewhere that felt less like a tomb. She'd been staring out the window crying for the first time in years when the maintenance man's mop clattered against her marble floor. The next morning, Marcus woke at 6:30 to Emma's alarm clock screaming through thin walls. He found her already dressed, sitting at their tiny kitchen table with crayons spread across homework she'd finished last night. "What are you drawing, baby girl?" Emma held up construction paper covered in careful crayon work. A 2-story house with purple shutters, a garden full of flower-shaped blobs, 2 stick figures in the window, One tall, one short. It's for homework. We're supposed to draw our dream home. Marcus's heart performed its familiar fracture. Emma drew houses constantly. Always 2 stories, always with a yard, always with 2 stick figures that looked happy in ways their cramped apartment couldn't manufacture. Tell me about it. It has a room just for my books and a kitchen where we can bake cookies. And maybe a dog. She looked up hopefully. Maybe someday. Marcus said the lie tasting like ash. Dogs required deposits. They didn't have vaccines. They couldn't afford time he didn't possess. Mrs. Santos says dogs are good for kids, that they teach responsibility. Marcus made a note to have words with Mrs. Santos about putting ideas in his daughter's head. Mrs. Santos is probably right, but our building doesn't allow pets. You know that. Emma's face fell just enough to break him, but she recovered with 7-year-old resilience. That's okay. When we get a house, we can have a dog then. When we get a house, as if houses grew on trees, as if men who mopped floors for a living could afford mortgages in cities where studio apartments cost $500,000. The doorbell's unexpected ring cut through his spiraling thoughts. They never got visitors. His mother lived 3 states over their relationship, cordial but distant. The friends from before Catherine's diagnosis, before the medical bills, before his life became a careful choreography of survival, had drifted into memory, unable to bridge the gap between their lives and his. Marcus opened the door expecting Jehovah's Witnesses or someone with the wrong address. Mrs. Santos stood there instead, eyes bright with gossip. Did you see the news that rich CEO, the one from your building, her penthouse burned down last night? They're saying electrical fire. Whole place gone. They showed her on the street in her bathrobe, everything she owned just gone. Ice water flooded Marcus's veins. Diana Sterling from Sterling Dynamics. That's the one terrible thing. Though I suppose she's rich enough to just buy a new penthouse, right? Some people have all the luck, even when they don't. Marcus barely heard the rest of Mrs. Santos's chatter. His mind was stuck on the image of Diana Sterling crumpled against that window, mascara streaked and broken. Now she'd lost everything on top of whatever had driven her to tears. He should feel vindicated. Should think karma had a sense of irony. Instead, he just felt hollow. Later, when he took a break to fix Mrs. Patterson's garbage disposal, no charge, just being neighborly, the old woman launched into her own version of the story. Rich people's problems. They build those towers too high thinking they're gauze. Then reality comes knocking. Serves her right, probably never worked an honest day in her life. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Fixed the disposal, washed his hands, left without comment. Let Mrs. Patterson think whatever she wanted. He knew the truth. Diana Sterling had worked herself into isolation, built an empire that echoed, and now watched it burn. Somewhere in Manhattan, Diana was living through her own private hell. Day 1, 2 a.m. Smoke alarms shrieking through her penthouse like the soundtrack to apocalypse. Diana stumbled from bed, disoriented by interrupted sleep, and found her living room consumed by flames that crawled up custom drapes and licked at crown molding. She grabbed her phone and a bathrobe, nothing else. No time. The smoke was already making her eyes water, her lungs burn. She made it to the hallway as her front door blew open, and firefighters in full gear stormed past her toward the conflagration. Someone, a neighbor, maybe she couldn't tell, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and guided her to the stairs. 45 flights down because elevators were death traps during fires. By the time she reached the street, her penthouse was fully engulfed. She stood on the sidewalk in her bathrobe and watched flames devour everything she owned. The Hermès scarves from Paris. Her mother's jewelry, the one thing she'd kept after the funeral. $10,000 dresses hanging in a walk-in closet larger than most people's bedrooms. Photo albums from before she became Diana Sterling, CEO. When she was just Diana Harrington, a girl who thought love was real and marriage was forever. The news crews arrived before the flames were out, 20 cameras capturing her bathrobe and bare feet and the mascara she'd forgotten to remove before crying herself to sleep. A reporter shoved a microphone in her face. "Miss Sterling, how do you feel watching your home burn?" How did she feel? Like her life was a cruel joke, like the universe was stripping her down to nothing, layer by layer, testing how much she could lose before breaking completely. What she said instead: "I'm grateful everyone made it out safely. Material possessions can be replaced." The lie tasted like smoke. Day 2, she checked into the plaza because that's what people with money did during crises. The presidential suite cost $6,500 a night and felt exactly like her penthouse expensive empty echoing. She ordered room service she didn't eat and took calls from her insurance company about processes that would take months. Claims adjusters and loss assessors and investigators making sure she hadn't burned down her own home for the payout. Outside the hotel, reporters camped in shifts, every exit covered, every attempt to leave the building captured on camera and broadcast with speculation about her mental state, her business acumen, her ability to continue leading Sterling Dynamics while homeless. She hated that word, homeless, as if having money made displacement less real, as if luxury hotels could replace the place where you stored your memories and kept your ghosts. Day 3 insurance adjuster delivered the verdict, 4 to 6 months minimum, maybe longer if complications arose. They'd found faulty wiring in the wall's 15-year-old electrical work that previous owners had installed without permits. Not her fault, but her problem. Her lawyer was already drafting lawsuits that would take years to resolve and recover a fraction of what she'd lost. The board meeting happened over Zoom because she couldn't risk the media circus of showing up in person. Richard's face filled one square of her laptop screen, sympathy dripping from his voice like poison. Diana, perhaps you should consider stepping back until your personal affairs are settled. The optics of this situation. The optics are that Sterling Dynamics is up 18% year over year, and our CEO experienced a household emergency. Unless you're suggesting I should resign over faulty wiring. Of course not. I'm simply concerned about the strain. Your concern is noted and dismissed. Are there any actual business matters to discuss? She won that battle too. But it cost her. Everything cost her. Day 4 friends. Though that word felt generous, started calling with offers of guest rooms. Penelope Ashworth suggested her Hamptons estate, then mentioned the charity gala next weekend that really needed a high-profile donor. Marcus Wade offered her his brownstone in Brooklyn, then pivoted to discussing a merger deal. He wanted Diana's advice on purely coincidental timing, of course. Every offer came with strings. Invisible spider silk that wrapped around her ankles and wrists and throat until she couldn't breathe. Nobody was offering sanctuary. They were offering transactions dressed in concern. Day 5. The paparazzi situation escalated. Photographers staked out every plaza entrance. The garage, the service corridors, even the kitchen exit she tried to use for her morning coffee run. Someone had tipped them off, or maybe they'd just deployed enough bodies to cover every angle. The headline stopped being sympathetic. Homeless heiress hiding in plaza. Sterling's fall from grace. EO in crisis, can Diana Sterling survive? She felt suffocated, trapped in a luxury cage while cameras waited for her to break spectacularly enough to justify their vigil. That afternoon, sitting in her $6,500 a night prison, Diana remembered Marcus Chen, the maintenance man who'd offered his home with no agenda, no transaction, no strings, just kindness from someone who had nothing to gain and everything to lose. She pulled up Sterling Tower's employee database. The system logged her in automatically. CEO privileges meant access to everything. She searched Marcus Chen and found him 42 years old, night maintenance supervisor, 8 years with the company address listed as 2847 Morrison Avenue, apartment 3B, Queens. His personnel photo showed a tired face, kind eyes, the sort of person who became invisible because the world trained itself not to see people who cleaned up after them. Diana stared at that address for 10 minutes. This was insane. Showing up at an employee's home, an employee who'd clearly been joking when he made his offer, a man who lived in Queens with a 7-year-old daughter and probably barely tolerated his own life without adding a displaced CEO to the mix. But where else could she go? Every hotel would be the same circus. Every friend's guest room would come with the same strings. Every option kept her trapped in a world where nothing was given freely and everything cost more than its price tag suggested. Marcus Chen had looked at her that night and seen Diana Mount, not Diana Sterling, CEO, had offered warmth without transaction. Maybe that was worth risking the humiliation of being turned away. Day 6. She packed the suitcase her assistant had brought to the hotel, designer jeans she'd bought for a weekend in Napa and never worn, a simple white blouse, sneakers instead of heels. She pulled her hair into a ponytail and skipped the makeup, looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Good. Maybe that meant the paparazzi wouldn't either. She hired a car service to take her to Queens, made the driver circle the block twice to ensure no one was following, then stepped out onto Morrison Avenue feeling like an astronaut landing on an alien world. The buildings here were 3 stories brick construction from the 50s that had seen better decades. Laundry hung from fire escapes. Kids' toys littered small yards. A corner bodega advertised beer and neon. Everything felt immediate and real in ways her life hadn't in years. Number 2847 looked like its neighbors, tired but cared for working-class dignity, holding off entropy through sheer, stubborn will. Diana climbed the concrete steps to the 3rd floor, found apartment 3B, and realized she was about to do the craziest thing she'd ever done. Crazier than starting a business at 25. Crazier than divorcing Richard despite his threats. Crazier than every risk she'd ever calculated and taken. She rang the doorbell. Inside, Marcus stood over a pot of macaroni and cheese while Emma colored at their tiny kitchen table. 6:30 on a Tuesday evening. His shift didn't start until 10, so he was making dinner, helping with homework, being present in the small ways that parenting required when you were all your kid had. The doorbell's chime froze them both. "Who's that, Daddy?" "I don't know, baby girl. Stay here." Marcus crossed to the door with the vague anxiety of someone who never got unexpected visitors and therefore assumed they brought bad news. Maybe Mrs. Santos with some emergency. Maybe Mrs. Patterson complaining about noise that didn't exist. Maybe. He opened the door. Diana Sterling stood on his cracked porch, designer suitcase at her feet, wearing jeans and a white blouse that probably cost more than his monthly grocery budget. Her hair pulled back. No makeup. She looked younger, like this vulnerable human in ways her business armor never allowed. "You said there was room." Marcus's mouth opened, closed, opened again. No words came. Behind him, Emma's voice cut through his paralysis. "Daddy, who's that?" Diana's eyes flickered past him to the 7-year-old visible through the doorway, then back to his face. "My penthouse burned down. The hotels are surrounded by reporters. I need somewhere no one will think to look." She paused, something fragile creeping into her voice. "You offered." "I was joking." "I know." She picked up her suitcase, the gesture somehow both determined and defeated. "Were you serious about the coffee being warm?" Marcus stared. The universe had clearly lost its mind. Diana Sterling, CEO of a billion-dollar empire, stood on his porch asking about his coffee. His terrible grocery store brand coffee that he made in a $15 machine. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. But Emma was already pushing past him, curiosity overwhelming caution. "Are you sleeping over? We have macaroni and cheese. Daddy makes really good macaroni and cheese." Something in Diana's expression softened a crack in whatever armor she used to survive boardrooms and hostile ex-husbands. She looked at Emma with an intensity that made Marcus's chest tighten. "I'd like that, if it's okay with your daddy." Both of them turned to look at him, Diana with desperate hope, Emma with innocent expectation. Marcus thought about propriety, about what neighbors would say, about every reason this was the worst idea in a life full of questionable decisions. Then he thought about Diana crumpled against that window, about the look in her eyes when she talked about penthouses echoing, about how he'd felt after Catherine died, when the whole world was noise, and the only peace came from strangers who offered kindness without agenda. He stepped aside and held the door open. "Welcome to our home, Ms. Sterling." Diana crossed the threshold carrying her suitcase, and Marcus knew with absolute certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. Not for him, not for Emma, not for the careful balance he'd constructed to survive. The universe had just shuffled the deck and dealt cards nobody could have anticipated. Somewhere across town in a Sterling Tower boardroom, where power brokers made plans, Richard Hastings was about to get very interesting news about his ex-wife's living arrangements. Somewhere in Manhattan's media ecosystem, reporters were about to lose their minds, trying to find a CEO who'd vanished into the only place they'd never think to look. Somewhere in the machinery of fate gears were turning that would change everything. But for now, in a cramped apartment in Queens that smelled like boxed macaroni and childhood, 3 people sat down to dinner. A maintenance man, a CEO, a 7-year-old girl who didn't understand why the grown-ups looked so nervous. Emma chattered about dinosaurs and her field trip. Diana listened with attention that seemed genuine. Marcus served 3 plates of the cheapest dinner he knew how to make and watched worlds collide in slow motion. Outside, the city hummed with its usual chaos. Inside, something new and fragile was beginning. Something that would either save them all or destroy everything they'd built to survive. The joke had become real and nobody knew the punchline yet. Diana woke on the couch at 6:15, neck screaming protest from angles the human spine wasn't designed to accommodate. Morning light filtered through curtains that didn't quite close, and somewhere nearby, Emma's alarm clock shrieked cartoon theme music at volumes that suggested war crimes. The cushions had left lines pressed into her cheek. Her silk pajamas, the only sleepwear her assistant had thought to pack, felt ridiculous in this space where everything served function over form. She heard water running, Marcus's shower brief and efficient. 5 minutes later, he emerged in work clothes that had seen 1,000 washes, hair damp, moving through the kitchen with the choreography of someone who'd mastered small space efficiency. The coffee pot burbled to life. Emma tumbled out of her room in mismatched socks and a nightgown covered in cartoon dolphins. The girl stopped short when she saw Diana on the couch, as if she'd forgotten overnight that their apartment had gained an occupant. "Good morning, sweetheart." Emma studied her with the brutal honesty of 7-year-olds evaluating alien life forms. "Do you want cereal? Daddy makes good eggs." Diana had never cooked eggs, had never cooked much of anything. Her penthouse kitchen existed for caterers and the occasional prepackaged salad she'd eat standing at the counter between conference calls. The idea of making breakfast felt exotic and slightly dangerous. "I'd like that. Coffee first, maybe." Marcus glanced over from where he was pulling a carton of eggs from the refrigerator. Coffee pots on the counter, mugs in the cabinet above it. Right, because in normal homes people serve themselves. Diana crossed to the kitchen, 3 steps in this space compared to the 20 it took to traverse her penthouse kitchen, and found the cabinet. 5 mismatched mugs, one chipped, all clearly accumulated over years, rather than purchased as a set. She chose plain white and poured coffee that smelled harsh compared to the single-origin beans her morning service delivered in temperature-controlled containers. It tasted like gasoline mixed with regret. She drank it anyway because refusing felt like admitting defeat. The eggs are simple. Just crack them in the pan, scramble with a fork, add salt. Diana had attended Wharton Business School, had negotiated $100 million real estate deals, had built a commercial empire from a subsidiary her father's partners called unsalvageable. But standing in Marcus Chen's kitchen with a carton of eggs felt like attempting neurosurgery with mittens on. She cracked the first egg. Shell fragments scattered across the pan like shrapnel. The second went better, or would have if she'd remembered to turn on the burner first. By the time she'd excavated shell bits and adjusted the heat, smoke was rising from butter she'd added too liberally. The smoke detector's shriek could wake the dead. Marcus appeared beside her so fast she startled, reaching past to flip off the burner and fan smoke away from the ceiling-mounted alarm with a dish towel. He wore no shirt, had grabbed the towel on his way out of the bedroom where he'd been changing, and for the first time, Diana registered him as something other than maintenance staff. Muscle definition that came from actual labor, not gym memberships. A scar across his shoulder blade, surgical probably. The sort of body that resulted from using it rather than sculpting it. Eggs are simple once you know the tricks. Temperature matters more than ingredients. His smile carried amusement but no mockery. Still, Diana felt her defenses spike. "I had staff. For cooking. For everything. Domestic." The smile faded. Something harder entered his expression, quickly suppressed. "Must be nice." The words landed like a slap despite his neutral tone. Diana opened her mouth to defend herself, to explain that staff wasn't luxury, it was efficiency, time management, the cost of running an empire. But Emma was staring at them both with worry, creasing her small forehead. "I'll make toast instead." She retreated to the couch while Marcus finished the eggs, and they ate breakfast in silence that felt heavier than the previous night's tentative conversation. Diana understood power dynamics in boardrooms, hostile negotiations, the careful dance of corporate warfare. She had no template for this domestic life with people whose reality bore no resemblance to hers. By day 3, the gaps in her practical knowledge had become impossible to ignore. She offered to do laundry, seemed only fair, since she was occupying their space, and managed to shrink a cashmere sweater to doll-sized dimensions in water so hot it steamed. Marcus found her staring at the ruin with something approaching despair. Hot water shrinks natural fibers. Cold for delicates, warm for everything else. Diana had paid people to know these things, had assumed such knowledge was beneath someone building commercial real estate portfolios. Now that assumption felt like arrogance disguised as efficiency. She couldn't fold fitted sheets, couldn't operate the vacuum cleaner without it spitting dust back at her, couldn't remember which cleaning product worked on which surface. Every task revealed another layer of incompetence, and Marcus's apartment offered no place to hide from her failures. Mrs. Santos, the woman who watched Emma, arrived at 4 to take over until Marcus left for his shift. She eyed Diana with unconcealed suspicion. "You're the lady from television, the one whose house burned." Yes, Marcus was kind enough to offer temporary shelter. Santos's expression suggested she had opinions about that kindness, none of them charitable. Temporary, that's good. Emma needs stability, not strangers coming and going. The judgment stung precisely because Diana couldn't argue against it. She was disrupting this careful ecosystem, bringing chaos and media attention and class friction into a space that had been functioning just fine without her. Emma kept her distance those first days, polite but reserved. She called Diana Ms. Sterling in tones that maintained formality like a moat. When Diana tried to engage her in play, the girl redirected to her father or retreated to her room with coloring books and an intensity that suggested fortification. Marcus seemed caught in his own confusion. Diana would catch him watching her with expressions she couldn't decode, calculation maybe, or concern, or the particular anxiety of someone who'd invited chaos through his door and couldn't uninvite it without looking cruel. He moved through the apartment, hyper-aware of where she was adjusting his path to maintain distance, speaking in careful neutral tones that suggested he was still deciding whether she was guest or intruder. The bathroom situation became its own special torture. One bathroom for 3 people. Diana's morning routine required 45 minutes minimum shower, skincare, hair, the construction of an armor that let her face the world as Diana Sterling rather than the raw mess underneath. But Emma needed the bathroom at 7:15 to brush teeth before school, and Marcus needed it at 6:30 between waking and his pre-shift tasks. Day 4, Emma knocked urgently on the bathroom door while Diana was mid-routine. "Miss Sterling, I really need to go." Diana cut short her skincare regimen, emerging with face half moisturized and hair still damp. Emma rushed past without comment, but Marcus's expression when he saw Diana, face shining with expensive serums, hair dripping on expensive silk, held something that might have been pity. She hated being pitied more than being judged. Privacy didn't exist here. The walls were thin enough that she heard Mrs. Patterson next door arguing with her television, heard teenagers on the floor below playing music that shook the ceiling, heard every conversation, every footstep, every reminder that her life had contracted from 4,000 square feet of soundproofed isolation to 850 square feet of communal exposure. She took work calls in Marcus's bedroom, felt wrong using his private space, but nowhere else offered even minimal quiet, and Emma burst in mid-conversation with one of her board members to show a drawing of a unicorn fighting a dragon. I'm on a call." The girl's face crumpled. Diana covered the phone's microphone. "The dragon is very fierce. Can you show me after my call?" Emma nodded, but the damage was done. She'd violated the child's space by treating their home like an extension of her office. Marcus's look when she emerged said he'd heard the exchange and filed it under evidence that Diana Sterling didn't understand how to exist in proximity to other humans. The food situation crystallized the class divide in ways that made Diana's chest tight. She watched Marcus at the grocery store, an expedition she'd tagged along on because sitting in the apartment felt like suffocation, and saw him calculate every item, comparing unit prices, choosing generic over name brand, putting back the chicken breast in favor of cheaper thighs. The cart's total came to $63, and Marcus counted out bills with the care of someone for whom that 63 represented careful budgeting rather than pocket change. Diana wanted to offer money, wanted to hand him her credit card and say, "Let me help. Let me contribute. This is the least I can do." But she'd learned enough in 4 days to know that offer would wound him, would make explicit the power imbalance already poisoning the air between them. So she said nothing and hated her own cowardice. Week 2 arrived with the inevitability of catastrophe. Tuesday morning, Diana was returning from an early walk. Needed air, needed movement, needed 30 minutes away from the apartment's claustrophobic intensity when she noticed a man with a camera sitting in a car across the street. He raised the camera when he saw her, then his phone. Then another car's door opened and more cameras emerged. 20 photographers materialized like locusts. The shouts started immediately. Was Sterling Diana? Are you living here? Who's the man you've been staying with? How long have you been dating Marcus Chen? Is this a breakdown? Are you having a breakdown? Diana tried to reach the building entrance, but bodies blocked her path. Cameras in her face, questions shouted over each other. She felt panic rising, not fear exactly, but the trapped animal recognition that she'd been cornered and had no clear escape route. Marcus appeared from inside the building, pushing through the crowd with grocery bags. He saw the situation, saw her frozen, and something hardened in his face. "Excuse me, let me through." "Mr. Chen, how long have you been seeing Diana Sterling? Are you after her money? Does your daughter approve of this relationship?" Marcus didn't answer, just kept moving, using his body to create space, getting between Diana and the cameras until they reached the building entrance. The door slammed shut on questions that followed them like smoke. Inside, Diana leaned against the wall, trying to catch breath that had gone shallow. "I'm sorry, I don't know how they found Richard." The name landed flat and certain. Marcus was looking at her with new understanding, the pieces clicking into place. "Your ex-husband. This is what he does." Diana nodded, miserable. "He wants me gone from the company. Making me look unstable serves that goal. And I'm collateral damage." Not a question. Marcus set down his groceries and ran both hands through his hair, the gesture speaking distress he usually kept contained. When he looked at her again, the careful distance had been replaced by something rawer. "Emma's going to hear about this at school. The other kids, their parents, everyone's going to have opinions. I'll leave. Today. I'll find somewhere where those cameras aren't going away just because you're not here anymore. They know about me now, about Emma. We're part of the story." Diana had no answer for that. She'd brought this plague to his doorstep and couldn't take it back. Couldn't undo the damage. Could only watch it metastasize. The damage arrived Thursday afternoon. Emma came home with tears tracking clean lines through playground dirt on her face. Mrs. Santos delivered her to the apartment with tight-lipped disapproval that needed no translation. Marcus took one look at his daughter and knelt to eye level. "What happened, baby girl?" Emma's voice came small and broken. "Madison said her mom said you're dating Miss Sterling for money, that we're gold diggers, that you're taking advantage of a sad rich lady who doesn't know better." Diana watched Marcus's jaw clench, watched him pull Emma into a hug that tried to shield her from words that had already landed. Over the girl's head, his eyes found Diana's and held them with accusation he was too decent to voice but couldn't fully suppress. This was her fault. Her presence had made Emma a target, had turned their quiet life into spectacle. "Madison doesn't know what she's talking about. Neither does her mom. People judge what they don't understand, and that's their problem, not ours." Emma pulled back to look at her father. "Why don't we just tell Ms. Sterling to leave? We were fine before she came." The words cut cleaner than any hostile takeover, any board member's betrayal. Diana felt them land somewhere vital and start bleeding. She opened her mouth to apologize, to agree to remove herself from this family she was destroying, but Marcus spoke first. "Because Miss Sterling needed help, and we had the ability to provide it. That's what good people do. They help when they can, even when it's inconvenient, even when other people don't understand. But I don't want her here anymore. I want it to be just us again." The honesty of childhood, brutal and unarguable. Marcus met Diana's eyes over Emma's head, and something passed between them that felt like understanding, like shared recognition that this situation was untenable, and no amount of good intentions could fix the structural problems. "Go wash up for dinner. We'll talk more about this later." Emma disappeared into the bathroom. The water running covered the silence that stretched between the two adults left standing in the kitchen. Marcus spoke first, voice tight. "She's right, this is too much. The media, the neighbors, her school. You should go. I'll help you find a place somewhere safe, but you can't stay here." Diana nodded. She'd known this was coming, had felt it building since the photographers appeared. "Where do you suggest hotels are staked out?" "My friends aren't actually friends. I have money, but nowhere that money can buy me safety from this circus. You're a billionaire. You have everywhere. The bitter edge in his tone made Diana's defenses flare despite knowing he was justified. I have money. That's not the same as having somewhere. At least you have that. Some of us don't even have the luxury of complaining about too many options. The class resentment he'd been suppressing for a week finally broke surface. Diana felt her own anger rise to meet it. Anger at being judged for circumstances she hadn't chosen, for having built success that made her somehow less sympathetic for existing in a world where people assumed wealth erased all other forms of suffering. You think I don't know? I'm lucky. You think I haven't spent every day since arriving acutely aware that my problems are luxury problems, that my incompetence at basic tasks must look like performance art to someone who's been managing alone for years. But here's what you don't understand. Marcus penthouses can be prisons too. Wealth can be isolation. I lost everything in that fire, not just possessions, every connection, every memory, every piece of evidence that my life meant something beyond balance sheets. And when I needed help, the only person who offered it without agenda was someone I barely knew who had every reason to say no. She was breathing hard now, walls down in ways she never allowed. So yes, I'll leave, I'll find somewhere, but don't you dare diminish what it meant that you saw me that night, that you offered. That for 1 week I got to pretend I was just Diana instead of Diana Sterling, CEO. That matters even if it can't continue. Marcus stared at her, something shifting behind his eyes. The bathroom door opened and Emma emerged, face washed but eyes still red. She looked between them with the particular awareness children develop when adults are fighting, but pretending they're not. Diana made the decision for all of them. Emma, your father's right. My being here is causing problems for you at school, and that's not fair. I'm going to find somewhere else to stay. But I want you to know that being here, meeting you, seeing how you and your dad take care of each other, that's been a gift. I'm sorry I brought trouble with me. Emma's face did something complicated. Guilt warring with relief. 7 years old was too young to navigate these waters, but here she was drowning in adult complications. I didn't mean I know you're allowed to want your home back. That's completely reasonable. That night they sat down together, Diana, Marcus, Emma, and tried to find equilibrium in the wreckage. Emma asked the question that had been lurking since Diana arrived. Are you and Daddy boyfriend, girlfriend? Diana felt Marcus tense beside her on the couch. No, sweetheart. Your father is helping me through a hard time, like how he helps Mrs. Patterson with her sink. Mrs. Patterson doesn't sleep on our couch, Marcus cut in, voice firm. Emma, that's enough. I miss when it was just us. The naked honesty of it hung in the air. No solution presented itself. Diana couldn't make the media attention disappear. Marcus couldn't protect Emma from schoolyard cruelty. Emma couldn't understand why the grown-ups kept making things complicated. They went to bed that night with nothing resolved and everything exposed. Week 3 brought shifts none of them expected. Emma's school hosted a student art exhibition Thursday evening, and Marcus couldn't attend mandatory building inspection he'd have been fired for missing. Diana saw his frustration, the guilt of choosing paycheck over presence. I could go, if Emma would be okay with that. Marcus looked at her with surprise that suggested he'd forgotten Diana was capable of parenting adjacent activities. You don't have to. I'd like to if Emma agrees. Emma considered this with visible skepticism. You'll actually come, not just say you will and then have a meeting. The question landed with precision that suggested the girl had been cataloging Diana's work habits, noting how phone calls interrupted dinners and emails pulled her attention mid-conversation. Diana felt the judgment and couldn't argue against its accuracy. I'll actually come. No phone calls, no meetings, just the art show. The elementary school gymnasium, transformed into makeshift gallery, smelled like tempera paint and industrial floor cleaner. Parents clustered in groups defined by invisible hierarchies Diana couldn't decode. They looked at her when she entered, recognition, flickering whispers starting, and she felt the weight of being spectacle rather than person. Emma's painting hung in the second grade section, a house rendered in careful crayon strokes, 3 stick figures visible through square windows. The tallest one wore pants and had short hair. The smallest had long hair and a dress. The middle figure's details were harder to parse, long hair wearing what might have been jeans and a fancy shirt. Diana stared at that middle figure and felt something crack open in her chest. Is that me? Emma appeared beside her, small and uncertain. Maybe, if you stay. Other parents were watching now. Three women in yoga pants and designer sneakers stood close enough that their conversation carried deliberately. That's her, the CEO living with the janitor. I heard he's after her money. My husband works in finance, says this kind of thing happens all the time. Vulnerable, wealthy women getting taken advantage of and exposing a child to it. Where's child services when you need them? Diana felt rage building, but Emma spoke first, voice carrying across the gymnasium with 7-year-old conviction. My daddy is a maintenance supervisor, not a janitor, and he works harder than anyone. He helps Ms. Sterling because her house burned and she needed help, and daddy says that's what good people do. Your mom should try it sometime. The three women went silent. Other parents suddenly found their children's artwork fascinating. Emma grabbed Diana's hand, small fingers wrapping around larger ones, and tugged her toward a different section of paintings. The dragon ones are cool. Want to see? Diana followed throat tight with something she couldn't name. Pride, maybe, or recognition that this child had defended her when she couldn't defend herself. Had seen past the spectacle to something worth protecting. Afterward, they got ice cream despite the October chill. Sat on a bench outside the shop while Emma explained her painting process, how she'd mixed colors, what each figure represented, why houses in her drawings always had yards, even though they lived in an apartment. Do you like being the boss of your company? The question caught Diana unprepared. I thought I did. Now I don't know. It used to feel important building things, making decisions that mattered. Lately it just feels like maintenance, keeping the machine running. Like daddy's job. Diana laughed, surprised by the comparison. I suppose so, though your father's maintenance actually keeps things working. Mine might just be expensive performance. Emma took this seriously, tongue-catching ice cream drip. Daddy says all jobs matter if you do them right, that nobody's better just because they wear suits. Your father's smarter than most of my board members. What's a board member? People who get paid to question my decisions and second-guess my judgment. That sounds mean. It is sometimes, but it also keeps me from making mistakes. Most of the time. Emma looked at her with sudden intensity. Is coming to our house a mistake? Diana thought about media circuses and schoolyard bullying, about cashmere sweaters ruined beyond repair, and smoke alarms triggered by cooking attempts, about how she disrupted this family's careful balance and brought chaos crashing through their door. No, coming here is the first thing I've done in years that feels like choosing instead of just reacting. Later that week, insomnia drove both Diana and Marcus to the kitchen at 2 a.m. He was making tea, a habit she'd noticed chamomile in his threadbare robe while the city hummed outside. She'd given up on sleep around 1:30, too many thoughts, circling, and emerged to find him already occupying their shared space. Can't sleep either. He shrugged, pulling out a second mug without asking if she wanted tea. The gesture felt domestic in ways that made her hyper-aware of boundaries she might be crossing. They'd been so careful, her on the couch, him in his bedroom, Emma between them like buffer. But 2 a.m. felt outside normal rules. I keep thinking about how we got here. The choices that seemed reasonable at the time, but add up to places we never intended. Marcus poured hot water over tea bags, set the mug in front of her. Catherine and I met at a community center. She was teaching art classes to kids. I was fixing a broken water heater. We had 6 good years before the cancer. Emma was 2 when her mother died, doesn't remember her face, just the idea of having had a mom once. Diana heard the pain underneath the words raw even 5 years later. I had a miscarriage 9 years ago. Gregory Richard, my ex, looked at me like I'd failed a performance review. Like losing the baby was negligence rather than biology. We were supposed to have an heir for his political ambitions. When I couldn't deliver that, I lost value in his ledger. You deserved better. The words came simple and certain. Diana felt them land somewhere she'd learned to armor, but couldn't seem to protect anymore. So did you. Partners who stay, who see you when things get hard, who choose you over convenience. Marcus's hands wrapped around his mug-calloused fingers that spoke to years of physical labor. I'm scared of wanting something I can't have, of letting myself believe that this, he gestured between them, could be real. I'm the guy who mops floors. You're going to rebuild your penthouse and go back to your world, and I'll still be here, wondering if any of it actually happened. Diana reached across the table, covered his hand with hers. The touch felt electric and terrifying and somehow inevitable. What if I don't want to go back? The question hung between them, fragile and dangerous. Marcus turned to face her, fully searching her expression for signs she was playing or testing or engaging in some power game he couldn't decode. Then stay, as long as you want. Something shifted. Some wall between them developed cracks. Diana felt it happening, but couldn't stop it and wasn't sure she wanted to. This man who had nothing had offered her everything that mattered, had seen her at her worst and chosen kindness, had opened his home despite knowing it would cost him. Before either could speak again, Emma's small voice came from the hallway. Daddy, Ms. Diana, I had a bad dream. They pulled apart like teenagers caught on. Emma appeared in doorway with her stuffed rabbit dangling from one hand, hair mussed from sleep. Diana opened her arms without thinking. Come here, sweetheart. We've got you. Emma crawled into her lap, small body still warm from blankets. Marcus watched something complicated playing across his face. His daughter seeking comfort from a woman who wasn't her mother, who'd arrived 3 weeks ago and disrupted everything, but who was here now offering safety. They sat like that, three people who shouldn't fit, but somehow did, until Emma drifted back to sleep. Marcus carried her to bed while Diana cleaned the tea mugs, and when he returned, they stood in the kitchen, not quite looking at each other. I should, Diana gestured toward the couch. Yeah, early morning tomorrow. But neither moved. The moment stretched until Marcus cleared his throat. What you said about staying, did you mean it? Diana met his eyes. I've never meant anything more in my life. Friday morning, Marcus got summoned to HR. Ms. Rodriguez's office overlooked the employee cafeteria, a deliberate design choice that let her monitor comings and goings while maintaining plausible deniability about surveillance. She gestured him to a chair with fingernails that looked weaponized. Mr. Chen, we've received complaints about inappropriate relationships between yourself and Ms. Sterling. Marcus felt his spine straighten, defensive mechanisms engaging. She's a temporary house guest. Her home burned. I offered shelter. The optics of a maintenance employee housing our CEO are concerning. Board members have expressed worry about impropriety. Our fraternization policy is very clear. Are you warning me or firing me? Consider this a warning. One more incident of questionable judgment and your employment will be terminated. We have standards to maintain. Marcus left the office feeling rage and helplessness in equal measure. 8 years of reliable service reduced to collateral damage in whatever power play was unfolding at levels he'd never access. He wanted to fight back but had no weapons. Wanted to protect Diana, but didn't know from what. He didn't tell her about the meeting. She had enough to deal with board conflicts conducted via phone from his bedroom insurance paperwork that could choke horses the slow process of rebuilding from ashes. But she noticed anyway. Diana Sterling hadn't built an empire by missing details. That evening, after Emma was asleep, she found him on the fire escape. The apartment had a small metal platform accessible through the kitchen window, barely large enough for 2 people, but offering sky view and cold air that felt cleaner than the apartment's recycled breath. Something's wrong. You've been quiet all day. Marcus debated lying, decided she deserved truth, even if truth made things harder. HR called me in, warned me about fraternization policy. Apparently housing you is questionable judgment that could cost me my job. Diana's face went through several expressions, surprise, anger, guilt, before settling on determination he'd seen her use in phone negotiations. I'll handle it. I'll call. No. The word came sharper than intended. You can't fight every battle for me. That just makes the power imbalance worse. Makes me the kept man people already think I am. You're not. I know, but that's what they'll say, what they already say. Some of us don't have the luxury of not caring what people think. My job, Emma's school, our lives here, they depend on reputation, on not becoming the story. Diana sat beside him, close enough their shoulders touched on the narrow platform. I'm so tired, Marcus. Tired of fighting. Tired of performing. Tired of pretending I'm strong enough to keep all these plates spinning without dropping any. I came here because you made me feel human again. Like Diana instead of Diana Sterling, CEO. but I'm poisoning your life, making Emma a target, risking your job. Maybe everyone's right. Maybe I should. Don't. Marcus turned to face her, the words coming before he could filter them. Don't go back to that penthouse and those empty rooms and the life that was killing you. Whatever this is, whatever we're building, it matters. It's real. Everything else is just noise. But Emma will adjust. Kids are resilient, and she's learning something important, that good people help each other even when it's inconvenient, even when other people don't understand. Diana was crying now, tears catching city lights. I haven't cried in years, not since the divorce. I trained myself out of it because crying is weakness, and weakness gets exploited. But since coming here, I cry every other day. What is that? That's being human instead of being a corporation. There's no weakness in that. She leaned into him, and Marcus wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. They sat like that while the city moved beneath them, two people from different worlds, finding unexpected shelter in proximity. Saturday afternoons shattered their fragile peace. Marcus was helping Emma with homework when the doorbell rang. His daughter looked up with worry that had become her default response to unexpected visitors. Too many photographers, too much unwanted attention. Marcus opened the door to find Richard Hastings on his threshold. $50 haircut, $5,000 suit, cold eyes that appraised and found everything wanting. You must be the maintenance man. Diana appeared from the bedroom, face going white. Ex-husband Richard, divorce finalized 2 years ago. You have no right to be here. Richard's smile could cut glass. I have every right. The board is concerned. Shareholders worried. Your living situation is creating instability that affects company value. Marcus kept his voice level despite adrenaline flooding his system. I think you should leave. Richard laughed, the sound designed to humiliate. You think you can tell me what to do? You're a janitor playing house with a woman so far out of your league, it's pathetic. Let me explain how this ends. You pack Diana's things, you watch her walk out that door, and you pray I don't have you fired before your next shift. Richard, Diana's voice cut like frozen steel. This isn't about the company. This isn't about shareholders. This is about you not being able to accept that I found something you never gave me. What a cramped apartment and a man who cleans toilets for living. Peace, kindness, a 7-year-old who doesn't care about my net worth, and a father who offered warmth when I had nothing. She stepped forward, positioning herself beside Marcus in a statement that needed no translation. I'm not going anywhere. Richard's mask cracked, revealing ugliness underneath. Then you'll lose everything. The board will vote you out. Shareholders will demand your resignation. I'll make sure of it. You can try, but unlike you, I built something real. I didn't marry into power, I earned it. The board knows that. The shareholders know that. You're just noise, Richard, and I'm done letting noise dictate my choices. Richard turned to Marcus, venom replacing fake civility. This'll destroy you, your job, your reputation, your daughter's future. She'll grow up knowing her father was a gold digger who couldn't keep his ambitions in check. Marcus felt Emma behind him, listening to every word. Felt Diana vibrating with rage beside him. Felt his own anger burning, but controlled, banked like coals. My daughter is learning that character matters more than bank accounts. That helping people is more important than protecting comfort. That her father makes choices based on decency, not fear. Those are lessons worth more than anything you could threaten me with. Richard stared at him, then at Diana, then back. You'll regret this. Both of you. He left footsteps heavy on stairs that echoed his exit. The door closed, and Marcus felt Emma press against his leg, small and frightened. Diana was shaking fine tremors she couldn't control. I should go, she whispered. He's right. If I stay, he'll destroy you. Your job, your reputation. Emma doesn't deserve. What I deserve is choosing for myself. Marcus knelt to Emma's level. Come here, baby girl. She collapsed into his arms, and he held her while speaking to Diana over his daughter's head. We don't let bullies make our decisions. We don't give fear more power than love. Richard can threaten all he wants, but this is our home, and we decide who belongs here. Emma pulled back to look at him. Is the angry man going to make Ms. Diana leave? Not if we don't let him. What do you think should Mrs. Diana stay for movie night? Emma looked between them, something shifting in her young face. The jealousy and resentment of the past weeks warring with the reality that Diana had defended her at the art show, had sat with them at 2 a.m. when nightmares struck, had tried, despite her obvious incompetence, to fit into their lives. You're part of our family now. You have to stay for movie night. Diana laughed, a wet, broken sound that held joy despite tears. How could I miss that? Wednesday morning arrived with the institutional cruelty of bureaucracy. Ms. Rodriguez didn't offer Marcus a seat this time, just stood behind her desk like an executioner who'd grown bored of ceremony. Mr. Chen, your employment is terminated effective immediately. Violation of company policy regarding fraternization with executive-level personnel. The words landed without impact at first brain, refusing to process what ears had heard. Diana doesn't work in this building. She conducts business from. The decision is final. Security will escort you to collect your belongings. 8 years reduced to a cardboard box. Emma's drawings taped inside his locker, carefully preserved through shifts and seasons. The photograph of Catherine he kept tucked behind his time card. A wrench his father had given him 20 years ago, with masking tape wrapped around the handle, the Chinese characters for honest work, still visible despite wear. The security escort felt designed for maximum humiliation. Colleagues watched him walk past with expressions ranging from pity to relief that the axe had fallen on someone else. Marcus kept his spine straight and eyes forward, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing him break. Outside, October air bit through his uniform shirt. He stood on the sidewalk holding his box of accumulated life and felt the ground shift beneath him in ways that had nothing to do with Earth's rotation. No job meant no insurance. No insurance meant one broken bone or bad flu away from medical debt that would swallow them whole. Emma's school supplies, her field trips, the dinosaur book she'd been asking for, all suddenly negotiable expenses in a budget that had no room for negotiation. He drove home in the Toyota transmission, grinding ominously as if the car knew his ability to fix it had just evaporated. Pulled into the apartment parking lot and sat behind the wheel, trying to organize panic into something resembling a plan. His phone showed 15 missed calls from Diana. She'd found out somehow. Probably called the building looking for him and got stonewalled by people who answered to her in theory, but protected Richard's interests in practice. Marcus turned off the phone and went inside to face consequences. Diana was pacing the apartment, fury incarnate, in yoga pants and an old college sweatshirt she'd borrowed from his closet. I can get your job back. I'll make calls, threaten litigation, remind them who actually runs that company. I don't want it back. She stopped mid-stride. What? That job was a paycheck, security, but it was never mine. Getting fired might be the push I needed to do something real. Real like what? You have a daughter to support. Bills due. You can't just. I'll figure it out. His voice came harder than intended embarrassment, making him defensive. People lose jobs every day and survive. I'm not special. Diana's expression cycled through emotions too fast to track. You're an idiot. A proud, stubborn idiot who'd rather drown than accept a life preserver. Maybe, but I need to know I can stand on my own before I can stand next to you. The fight went out of her like air from punctured tire. She sat heavily on the couch, face in her hands. This is my fault. Richard wanted to hurt me, and he's using you to do it. Marcus joined her close, but not touching. Richard's going to find out that hurting the people I care about just makes me more stubborn, not less. The first week of unemployment felt almost luxurious. Marcus fixed things around the apartment. He'd been putting off the cabinet door that hung crooked, the grout in the bathroom that had started to crumble. Applied to 23 jobs online, carefully crafting resumes that highlighted skills without mentioning recent termination. Week 2 brought the first rejections. Position filled. Not the right fit. One HR representative was honest enough to say his Google results created liability concerns. The story of Marcus Chen and Diana Sterling had made too many news cycles. Employers saw drama they didn't want imported into their workplaces. Unemployment benefits kicked in at $400 per week compared to the $730 his paycheck had provided. The math was simple and terrifying. Rent was $1,400. Mrs. Santos charged $600 for the month. Groceries at bare minimum ran $300 if he stretched rice and beans and eliminated anything resembling luxury. He was 800 short before accounting for utilities. Emma's school needs the Toyota's dying transmission. Diana offered money. Marcus refused with vehemence that surprised both of them. She tried again, framing it as a loan with interest and repayment schedules. He refused that too. Pride or stupidity, he couldn't distinguish between them anymore. Week 3 arrived with rent due and Marcus $800 short of making it. He sat at the kitchen table at 2 a.m. running calculations that refused to balance. Could ask his landlord for extension, but that just delayed the problem. Could pawn Catherine's wedding ring, but that felt like betraying her memory for survival. Could his phone buzz, a text from Frank Morrison, the retired plumber who'd mentored him, checked in weekly since the firing. Coffee tomorrow. They met at a diner in Astoria where Frank had been drinking terrible coffee for 30 years. The old man took one look at Marcus and ordered him breakfast despite protests. You look like hell, kid. When's the last time you ate a real meal? Yesterday, 2 days ago, I'm fine. You're a terrible liar. Frank pushed the plate of eggs and toast across the table. Eat, then we talk. The food tasted like surrender, but Marcus's stomach overruled his pride. He ate while Frank watched with the patience of someone who'd seen this particular crisis play out with other men, other circumstances. How short are you? I don't need how short. Marcus exhaled defeat. 800 for rent. Another 2 for Emma's field trip I already committed to. The car needs transmission work that'll run at least 500 if I do it myself. Frank pulled out his phone, opened his banking app, and transferred $1,500 before Marcus could stop him. That's not a loan. That's not charity. That's brotherhood. You'd do the same for me. Frank, I can't. Your father taught you the trade that's keeping you afloat. Before he died, he asked me to look out for you. I'm doing that. You want to repay me? Pay it forward someday when you're the old guy helping some kid who's drowning. Marcus felt the first cracks in armor he'd maintained since Catherine's funeral. The control that had kept him functional through grief and single parenting and financial catastrophe. His breath came uneven. Frank just sat there steady as bedrock, waiting. I don't know how to do this, how to accept help without feeling like I'm failing. That's the stupidity talking. Real strength isn't doing everything alone. Real strength is knowing when you need someone beside you. Frank's voice carried weight of lived experience. Your dad used to say the nail that stands alone gets hammered down. The nails that stand together become a foundation. You're trying to be the lone nail, Marcus. Stop it. Something broke loose in Marcus's chest. He cried for the first time since Catherine died, sitting in a diner booth with a man who'd taught him that tools fix more than pipes. Frank didn't offer platitudes or solutions, just sat there being present while Marcus fell apart and slowly reassembled. Afterward, Frank offered work. Small plumbing jobs, his retirement, clients still called about $50 an hour cash. Not enough to live on long term, but it'll keep you from drowning while you figure out the next move. Marcus took the jobs, swallowed his pride, and took them because Emma needed dinosaur books and field trips and a father who functioned. He fixed leaking faucets in brownstones and cleared drains in restaurants, and felt the particular humiliation of being grateful for scraps. Diana fought her own war on fronts, Marcus only glimpsed through phone conversations conducted in strained whispers. The board meeting Richard had called for week 7 loomed like an executioner's appointment. She needed evidence, leveraged something to counter his narrative that she'd become unstable. Week 6, she hired Patricia Wong, forensic accountant with a reputation for finding money people thought they'd hidden. Patricia worked out of a Chinatown office that smelled like litigation and justice in equal measure. I need you to dig into Richard Hastings. Venture capital, firm personal accounts, anything connected to Sterling Dynamics dealings over the past decade. Patricia's smile could cut diamonds. How dirty do you think we'll get? However dirty it takes. The investigation took 12 days and cost $30,000. Patricia delivered results on a Tuesday evening, spreading documents across Marcus's kitchen table like evidence at a trial. Your ex-husband has been embezzling from Sterling Dynamics for 5 years. Shell companies funneling contracts at inflated prices. He's netted approximately $3.2 million in funds that should have gone to company coffers. Diana felt vindication and nausea in equal measure. And the harassment complaints. 3 women, all paid off through Richard's lawyer with NDAs signed. The HR director who buried them retired 18 months ago to the Caymans. Convenient timing. Marcus watched Diana absorb information that could destroy Richard, but might also damage Sterling Dynamics. If you use this, the SEC will investigate. Stock might crash. Shareholders will panic. I know. Diana's hands trembled slightly as she sorted through documents. But if I don't use it, Richard wins. He removes me from the company I built, installs himself or a puppet, and spends the next decade strip mining value while pretending it's business strategy. What do you want to do? The question hung there, simple and impossible. Diana met Marcus's eyes and found something she'd been missing, someone asking what she wanted rather than what was strategic, profitable, optimal for shareholders. I want justice, even if it costs me. Then make the choice you can live with. Everything else is just noise. Week 7 brought news that felt like the universe's cruel sense of timing. Marcus's uncle, his father's older brother who'd moved to Oregon decades ago, died of a heart attack at 73. The lawyer's call came on a Thursday. Mr. Chen, your uncle left you his property in Queens, a house at 2847 Morrison Avenue. Also $35,000 after estate taxes. Marcus stood in his apartment, the same address as the house being willed to him 2 floors up, and felt reality tilt. His uncle had owned the building, had been the landlord Marcus paid rent to via management company for 8 years without knowing. He walked downstairs with Diana and Emma to see the ground floor unit. The space was gutted, had been used for storage, but the bones were solid. 2 bedrooms, full bathroom, kitchen that needed complete renovation. The whole building needed work. Roof leaked, boiler was ancient, electrical, probably violated 6 codes, but it was his. You could live here, Emma breathed, eyes wide. We could have more space. Or I could turn it into something else. The idea formed as Marcus walked through the rooms, seeing not what was, but what could be. A shop on this floor, repair work, handyman services, honest work at honest prices for people who can't afford the big contractors. Diana was quiet, watching him with an expression he couldn't decode. When they returned to the apartment, she finally spoke. That's incredibly brave, taking every penny you have and betting it on yourself. Or incredibly stupid. Sometimes those are the same thing. She touched his arm, the gesture still feeling electric after weeks of careful distance. What do you need to make it happen? Time, work. About 10,000 in materials and tools I don't have. Frank showed up the next morning with a proposal that felt like intervention from a universe Marcus had stopped trusting. The old man stood in the gutted shop space, running calloused hands over door frames and windowsills. I've got 10,000 in savings and 40 years of skills that are going to waste in retirement. You make me partner, we do this together. Frank, you don't want to. Stop telling me what I want. I'm 70 and bored. I want to build something that matters with someone I respect. You want to do this alone and fail, or with help and succeed. Your father would smack you upside the head for choosing pride over sense. Marcus felt that crack in his armor widen further. Equal partners. 50-50 split on profits. 60-40 in your favor. You've got a kid to raise, I've got a pension. We'll revisit when you're making enough that the math matters. They shook on it there in the empty shop, 2 men building something from nothing, because that's what men like them did. Built when building was needed, fixed what was broken, stood together because standing alone was just another way of falling. Week 9, Diana walked into the Sterling Dynamics board meeting with a briefcase containing Richard's destruction. Her hands were steady despite the knowledge that this could detonate her entire career, could make her a corporate pariah, could cost her everything she'd built. Richard sat at the far end of the table, confident and composed. His allies flanked him, 4 board members who'd bought his narrative about Diana's instability. The other 5 tried to project neutrality, but their body language suggested they'd already chosen sides. Let's begin. Richard, you called this meeting. Richard's smile never reached his eyes. The board has concerns about your capacity to lead Sterling Dynamics. Your personal situation, living with an employee, the media attention, the apparent inability to maintain professional boundaries suggest diminished judgment. I'm moving that you step down as CEO pending resolution of these personal matters. Diana waited for the murmurs to die. Before we vote, I'd like to present information relevant to board composition and conflicts of interest. She slid folders down the table, one to each member. You'll find documented evidence that Richard Hastings has embezzled $3.2 million from Sterling Dynamics over 5 years. Shell companies receiving inflated contracts, kickbacks funneled through his venture capital firm, a paper trail that forensic accountants have verified. The room erupted. Richard's face went from confident to cornered in seconds. This is fabrication, a desperate attempt to deflect from her own failures. There is also documentation of 3 sexual harassment complaints filed against Richard during our marriage. Complaints that were buried by an HR director who retired 18 months ago to the Caymans with a severance package that Richard personally approved. Richard stood, fury barely contained. You'd destroy the company to save yourself. Tank the stock price invite. SEC investigation, damaged shareholder value just to win a personal vendetta. Diana stood as well, meeting his eyes across mahogany. I'm destroying corruption to save the company. There's a difference. You want to know who's stable? The person who built this from a failing subsidiary, or the person who married into it and then robbed it? The legal counsel cleared his throat. If this evidence is accurate, Mr. Hastings faces criminal prosecution. The board has a fiduciary duty to act. The evidence is accurate. Patricia Wong's voice came from the doorway where she'd been waiting. I'm prepared to testify to that in any court. The vote took 17 minutes, 9-1 to remove Richard from the board, refer all evidence to authorities, and reaffirm Diana's position as CEO. The one dissenting vote came from Richard's college roommate, who'd been installed as a favor. Richard gathered his things in silence that felt more dangerous than his earlier threats. At the door, he turned back to Diana. You think you've won? I still have 10% of shares. I'll short the stock, tank your value, make your life hell for years. Do it. I've rebuilt from worse. Diana's voice carried exhaustion, but also certainty. I survived you once. I'll survive whatever comes next. He left, and the room exhaled collectively. Diana sat down heavily, adrenaline draining and leaving her hollow. That evening, Marcus was installing new electrical in the shop when his phone rang. Diana's voice came shaky with something that might have been triumph or terror. It's done. Richard's off the board. Evidence is with prosecutors. He'll spend the next decade in courtrooms and probably some time in prison. How do you feel? Like I burned down my life to save it. The SEC will investigate. Stock will take a hit. Shareholders will question my judgment. But Richard's gone. Then you did what needed doing. The rest you'll handle when it comes. Silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken things. I sold the penthouse. Marcus's hands stilled on the wire he'd been stripping. What? The insurance payout came through. I could rebuild, make it exactly like it was. But I don't want that life back. So I sold it. $3.8 million. Half goes to legal fees and taxes. The rest I don't know. Maybe a down payment on something that doesn't echo. You could buy anywhere. I don't want anywhere. I want somewhere. There's a difference. Marcus understood what she wasn't saying, felt the weight of possibility hanging between them like a question neither knew how to ask. The shop's going to be ready for soft opening next month. Nothing fancy, just basic repair services. But it's ours, mine and Frank's. I'd like to see it when you're ready. 3 months later, the sign went up. Chen and Daughter Repairs, in letters Emma had painted, each one a different color, because 7-year-olds understood joy better than adults who'd forgotten how. The shop smelled like fresh paint and sawdust and possibility. Grand opening fell on a Saturday in January. Marcus had spent the previous night panicking about whether anyone would come, whether this whole venture was expensive failure disguised as brave reinvention. Frank just kept working steady as always, refusing to let Marcus's anxiety infect their foundation. Mrs. Patterson arrived first, carrying a toaster that had stopped working. Heard you're doing repair work. This thing's been broken for a month. Marcus took the toaster, fighting a smile. Mrs. Patterson had complained about him for years, called Diana a disruption, made her opinions about his life choices abundantly clear. Now she was his first customer. I'll have it fixed by Monday. Good. Can't afford those fancy repair places. They charge 3 times what the work's worth. Mrs. Santos came next with a lamp, then 3 neighbors from the old building. Then a woman who'd heard about the shop from a friend. By noon, they'd logged 8 jobs for the following 2 weeks. By closing, they had 15. Frank clapped Marcus on the shoulder. Not bad for a first day. Not bad at all. Diana arrived at 6 with coffee and pastries from the place down the street that charged too much but made things taste worth the price. She'd been at Sterling Dynamics all day, crisis management, after news broke about Richard's indictment, shareholders demanding explanations, the endless maintenance work of keeping an empire functional. But she was here now looking at Marcus's accomplishment with pride that felt unearned and necessary in equal measure. Congratulations, Mr. Chen. She kissed him in full view of the street, past caring who saw or what they'd say. I'm proud of you. Emma burst out from the brush room where she'd been organizing hardware into containers with label maker precision. Diana, look at all the screws I sorted. Frank says I'm a natural organizer. Diana knelt to Emma's level, examining the containers with appropriate seriousness. This is excellent work, very professional. When the shop makes money, Daddy says I get allowance for helping. Then I can save for the dinosaur book and maybe a real microscope. Sounds like a solid business plan. They closed up shop as January darkness fell early and walked upstairs together. The second-floor unit had been slowly transformed over 3 months, Marcus and Frank doing the work between repair jobs, turning storage space into something resembling a home. It was bigger than the third-floor apartment, had a yard Emma could use come spring, felt like the possibility of permanence. Diana had been spending more nights here than at the hotel suite she'd rented after selling the penthouse. Her things had migrated over naturally toiletries in the bathroom, clothes in the closet. Marcus had cleared her coffee mug that lived beside his in the dish rack. They hadn't discussed what this was becoming, hadn't labeled it or defined boundaries. Just let it evolve like the shop taking shape through accumulated actions rather than grand declarations. Emma asked the question at dinner blunt with the honesty children wielded like surgical tools. Is Diana living here now? Like for real, living here? Marcus and Diana exchanged glances, some wordless negotiation happening in the space between them. Would that be okay with you? Diana's voice held vulnerability. Marcus had learned meant she was terrified of the answer. Emma considered this with visible seriousness. Will you keep helping me with art projects? Yes. And come to school things even when you have meetings. I'll try my best. I can't promise I'll never miss anything, but I'll try. And you'll stay even when things get hard, not just leave when it's not fun anymore. The question landed heavier than its simple words suggested. Diana heard all the abandonment issues underneath all the learned wariness of a child who'd lost her mother too young. She reached across the table, covered Emma's small hand with her larger one. I'll stay. Through hard things and boring things and things that test my patience. I'm not going anywhere. Emma nodded slowly. Okay then, you can live here, but I get to help pick your room decorations because Daddy has no style. Marcus laughed the sound surprised out of him. Thanks for the vote of confidence, baby girl. It's true you have like 3 colors, blue, gray, and brown. That's it. Those are classic colors. They're boring colors. Diana was laughing now too, the tension breaking like weather patterns shifting. This family they were building from spare parts and good intentions and stubborn refusal to let fear make their decisions. 6 months after the fire that had destroyed her penthouse and inadvertently reconstructed her life, Diana stood in the small backyard of the Morrison Avenue house watching Emma chase fireflies in the July dusk. Marcus appeared beside her with 2 beers, condensation cold against the humidity. Penny, for your thoughts. I was thinking about penthouses, about how they echo when nobody's waiting, how I spent years accumulating space and things and achievements that looked like success but felt like elaborate prisons. Regret selling it? Not even a little. She accepted the beer, let their shoulders touch in the casual intimacy they'd developed. I regret not knowing sooner that success isn't about the view from the top. It's about having someone to share the view with. Any view. Even if it's just a backyard in Queens with fireflies and a kid who thinks she can catch them all. Marcus pulled her closer, kissed her temple. For the record, I still can't believe you moved in. Still feels like a joke that became real. Best joke you ever told. Emma ran over the hands cupped around a captured firefly. Look, I got one. Can we keep it? Fireflies die in captivity. You have to let it go so it can find its family. Emma's face fell, but she understood. Opened her hands and watched the insects spiral upward into darkening sky. Do you think it'll find them? I think things that are supposed to find each other usually do, even when the path there is complicated. They stood together, watching fireflies write light across the growing dark, three people who'd found each other through circumstances none would have chosen but all were grateful for. Diana had lost a penthouse and gained a home. Marcus had lost a job and gained a business. Emma had gained something harder to quantify, proof that families could be built, not just born into. Somewhere across the city, Richard Hastings sat in a lawyer's office, listening to prosecution details that would define his next decade. The SEC investigation had widened to include his venture capital firm. The harassment victims had gone public. His reputation, carefully constructed over decades, was rubble. Somewhere in Sterling Dynamics' executive suite, the company continued its relentless machinery. Diana went in 3 days a week now, instead of 6, had restructured her schedule to accommodate school pickups and family dinners, and the revolutionary notion that CEOs were allowed to have lives outside their empires. Somewhere in the machinery of fate, other people were encountering their own inflection points. Other fires destroying comfortable cages, other maintenance workers offering impossible jokes that became salvation. But here in a backyard in Queens, with fireflies and cheap beer and a child's laughter, three people had found what so many spent lifetimes seeking: a place where they belonged, not despite their differences, but because of them. Where wealth and working-class realities collided and created something neither could have built alone. The penthouse had stopped echoing, not because Diana had rebuilt it, but because she'd learned that echoes only mattered in empty spaces. And this space, crowded and chaotic and full of love that had surprised all of them, was anything but empty. Emma came back with another captured firefly. This one's really bright. Do you think he's the leader? Marcus crouched beside his daughter, patient as always. Could be, or maybe she's just really good at her job, making light in the dark. Diana watched them together, this family she'd stumbled into through catastrophe and desperation, and felt something settle in her chest. Purpose, maybe, or peace, or the simple recognition that she'd finally found what penthouses and corner offices and billion-dollar empires could never provide. Home wasn't about square footage, wasn't about designer furniture or imported tile or views that cost millions. Home was Emma's firefly expeditions and Marcus's terrible coffee, and the particular chaos of three people learning to share space without losing themselves. The firefly escaped Emma's hands, joining its companions in aerial ballet. The girl watched it go with philosophical acceptance. I'll catch more tomorrow. That's the spirit. They went inside as mosquitoes joined the evening's offerings. The house smelled like the pasta Marcus was making, nothing fancy, just sauce from a jar, and noodles boiled until soft, but it tasted like chosen family. Like second chances. Like the particular richness that came from building something together, rather than inheriting it ready-made. Diana Sterling had learned the hard way that the biggest walls weren't built from concrete and glass. They were built from fear and control and the desperate need to appear invulnerable. Breaking those walls down hurt worse than any building fire. But what emerged from the rubble was worth every moment of terror. She joked once in what felt like another lifetime that she had rooms where nobody waited. Now she had rooms where everybody waited, where laughter filled corners and coffee was always warm, and the couch had a dent from three people who'd learned that fitting together mattered more than fitting in. And if you listen close past the sounds of dinner preparation and a child recounting firefly statistics with scientific precision, past the hum of a city that never quite slept, you might hear it, the echo of a penthouse, finally silent, finally at peace because somewhere across town, warmth had found its permanent home.